City's comptroller rejecting a $432 million contract between the city's housing department and DocGo, saying the organization is seeking to make a profit off a humanitarian crisis.
There were a number of concerns.
Yet New York City secretly gave this company a new $40 million contract to run a shelter for asylum seekers, located in a prison-style building which used to house businesses that have all been shut down. But that's not even the controversial part. The group running the shelter has a history of abusing asylum seekers while making money off New York City taxpayers, which is why critics say forcing people into their new shelter is a bad deal for everyone.
Local leaders and advocates gathered outside a former hotel turned shelter. They want the city to shut it down after they say the quality of life has gone down due to street crime, theft, and unregistered mopeds.
In recent months, the city has had to scramble to house thousands of migrants bussed from the border in emergency hotels, many of which do not have cooking facilities.
The CEO of DocGo has resigned. Anthony Capone admitted to lying about his educational record. DocGo was already under scrutiny over whether it is fulfilling its contractual obligations to provide services for asylum seekers.
This mom of two says sometimes the food smells bad, rotten. This mother of three says if the food was edible, I would make them eat it.
So tomorrow marks 1 week since the president made that announcement to crack down on the border. But people that we're talking to here on the front lines, including people within Border Patrol, say not much has changed here.
A spokesperson for DocGo responding in a statement saying they've received assurances from the mayor's office that New York City intends to fully pay DocGo for services delivered under this contract.
So a massive shelter will now be turned over to one of New York's most controversial nonprofits. But what nobody's talking about is that this isn't a unique situation, and the asylum crisis has proven to be the biggest cash grab in New York City history. In fact, it's even bigger than that, with the bus companies allegedly charging Texas and other states $1,300 per seat to bring asylum seekers to New York, 5 times the price of an ordinary ticket. But that's just the beginning. After asylum seekers arrive in New York, the welcoming arms of profit-driven nonprofits are waiting to usher them into America's largest sanctuary city, while making hefty amounts of money. And along with the humanitarian organizations who are supposedly just here to help, the city itself has greatly expanded its safety net. Asylum seekers from all over the world can meet with caseworkers who speak their language, while getting instant assistance applying not only for asylum, but free medical care, checkups, and placements at a local shelter, which controversially evict single adults every 30 days to make room for the new arrivals who are essentially walking dollar signs to these privately owned hotels, warehouses, and factories, which have all been converted. Which brings us to the real reason this asylum crisis isn't going away anytime soon. Because even after a recent border crackdown by the federal government, there's just way too much money to be made, which critics say means every company on the city's ever-expanding payroll has every reason for this crisis to keep going. But at the same time, these companies are taking in millions of dollars. They're cutting costs so aggressively that these shelters, critics say, are run more like prisons than places intended to help the less fortunate. This here is one of the other shelters this company was involved with previously, and before we talk about the new shelter that they've got, the stuff that was going on in here, this is where all the controversy around them first started.
Controversy tonight after loads of food meant for migrant families got thrown out.
Raw, cold, and expired. That's how refugees living here at the Row Hotel describe the food they're being served by the city. Residents here point to pasta covered in grease and meatballs still frozen.
So this story first broke after evidence leaked that the company that's going to get the new shelter was doing a pretty bad job running this one right here. They had received a generous $432 million contract to feed the people that are here and at other shelters, yet the meals they provided made everybody sick and were rotten, and were apparently winding up in the garbage, costing the city millions of dollars. And to make matters worse, they weren't even supposed to run this entire facility. They were just in charge of food provision. But the controversy starts because they didn't have any prior experience providing food for anybody. In fact, this particular company, DocGo, they used to be a medical services provider. They provided PPE to the local government here when there was a crisis that needed that. And now that there's a new crisis that involves asylum seekers, they've changed around their whole business to profit from that, it seems. Because earning money from a government who's desperate to spend it is a pretty easy job. Because the generous contract they got, where all of the food wound up in the trash, well, apparently that was a no-bid contract, which means that other companies were not allowed to also bid on how much it would cost them to provide the exact same service. Basically, no-bid contract contracts always look like corruption, even if they're not. And when you see what they were feeding people, the idea of them getting rewarded with another contract to do something else is somewhat mystifying.
Meatballs still frozen in the middle. This mom of two says sometimes the food smells bad, rotten, and every time the children eat the food like that, they get food poisoning. But Mayor Adams implies the migrants are just being picky.
Come on, food poisoning in modern America in 2024? Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. There's no excuse for that, especially when the meals at that point in time were $11 each. Yet now these folks are being awarded with the opportunity to do more of their same great work for the government. But perhaps they've changed. Perhaps they've reformed. Perhaps that now that they've gone from providing PPE to providing food to just a general humanitarian services provider, maybe now they've got their act together. But you've got to wonder, if they were already caught cutting corners while feeding the people that are in this shelter, what are they going to do when they have a shelter of their own? What corners are they going to cut to save money on that one while getting paid to do it the right way? And are they even telling the truth when they say they're up to the task in the first place?
The CEO of DocGo has resigned. Two on Your Side has learned that Anthony Capone admitted to lying about his educational record, which claimed he had a graduate degree from Clarkson University. The university says he was never even a student there. Capone admitted to the...
So not only is this a brand new company that changes its business model every time there's an opportunity to make money, the CEO even lied about going to college. Yet they're still in business with the city. And that makes you wonder, what else could they be lying about? Who else that works here is underqualified? Or worse, is totally unqualified to be helping people that are in a really dire situation? It's also worth mentioning that the city bears a lot of responsibility for this. After all, none of us would hire a plumber who had no reviews or bad reviews on the internet, yet that's exactly what the city did. They've essentially gone and hired a brand new business to do a brand new task for the second time after the first time went poorly. And what's ridiculous is we keep hearing about how important it is for background checks to happen for the asylum seekers, yet the government's not doing its own background checks on the companies it hires to take care of them. But what's even more controversial about this is that in America, we don't reward failure, yet it seems like that's exactly what's happening here. This company, they're getting a do-over almost, and apparently it was agreed to in secret, which advocates say was done on purpose to make it look like the city was holding people accountable for what they had done in the past, when in reality, no such accountability was even being asked for.
New York City's comptroller rejecting a $432 million contract between the city's housing department and DocGo, saying the organization, as a medical staffing provider, had no business receiving the contract, and alleging DocGo is seeking to make a profit off a humanitarian crisis.
There were a number of concerns.
The city comptroller...
So as it turns out, the same day the $432 million food contract for shelters like this one was canceled, this company, they got a do-over. They were given a new contract in secret, which makes absolutely no sense when you look at the comptroller's reasons for canceling the more expensive of the two contracts. The comptroller rejected this company because he said they were not a food provider. They were a medical services company. And he also mentioned reports of the people that work at this company mistreating those they were supposed to be taking care of. But it gets even worse because the former CEO who lied about going to college went public saying that this contract was going to help them move up the chain and get contracts with the federal government worth billions of dollars. $4 billion to be specific. That's a lot of money. And to go out and say, yeah, we're doing such great work here in New York that it's going to help us move on to bigger and better. Can you imagine if the federal government had signed these guys up? But to be clear, it's not just this one company making millions off the asylum crisis. The thing that's really shocking is how much these non-profits seem to be driven by profit, cutting costs at a time when all of the expenses needed to care for people are already covered. Pretty much every company that's in on this cash grab, not just the people that own this hotel or the company that provides food for it, they all know what a money-making opportunity this is, and they're only going to make more money as this crisis continues to get worse, all while the people paying for it and the people that are in it suffer. And this is all happening right here in New York with no signs of slowing down, even while the country says that it's doing what it can to crack down on the border and limit how many people pass through, which means the asylum crisis in New York isn't going away anytime soon. So just as the city is expanding its shelter complex with new buildings like the one we've been discussing that don't look like the friendliest places to possibly stay, the original shelter and intake center, the Roosevelt Hotel, it's still here. It's still the main processing center for all of the new arrivals from the southern border every single week. And what most people don't know is that even though there are new border restrictions in place, that's not really going to disincentivize people from trying to come to America's largest sanctuary city, which means our asylum crisis is going to continue far into the future.
Tonight, more backlash over President Biden's executive action tightening asylum restrictions at the border.
The humanitarian element of this problem has just completely been lost.
The continued criticism after a group of immigrant advocacy organizations, including the ACLU, sued the Biden administration, saying the new restrictions go too far.
Will this actually work? Is this...
So the other week, new executive action on the U.S. southern border. Now, critics on the right say these orders don't go far enough. Critics on the left say that they're just as bad as what the last president was doing, maybe even worse. But the reality is these restrictions mean you could get deported if you cross at a non-official port of entry, which is just going to increase demand for hotel room space in sanctuary cities like this one. Because part of the reason the asylum crisis here is so big is because New York guarantees the right to a place to stay for anyone who asks on a temporary basis. And once you're here, your immigration status no longer matters. Even if you get arrested, we won't share that information with ICE. Now, granted, the folks who come into the country this way might be barred from seeking asylum and ever getting work permission, but that hasn't been a problem in New York. There's a massive underground labor force here that is just growing. And it's part of the reason why you see so many mopeds parked at the various shelters, as they're being rented out to people without work permission so that they can do Uber Eats under someone else's account. So if in this city, work permission doesn't matter, immigration status doesn't matter, you better believe that places like this hotel and all the others we've talked about want this crisis to keep going so that they can make money, more money than they were ever making off tourists, because most of these places were bankrupt. And at the large prison-style facility, all of the companies that were in there had shut down because of 2020. Crises like these are the best thing to happen in many of these buildings.
The order temporarily barring many migrants who cross the border illegally from requesting asylum when illegal crossings are over 2,500 per day, like they have been for the past 3 years. The National Immigrant Justice Center is co-counsel on the suit.
My biggest fear is that...
Okay, so we've established what a great city New York is for people who want to come here and never be forced to leave. But did you ever wonder, what are the companies that make all of this money off these government contracts going to turn around and do with it? Is there a chance that in America they could use that money for more of the same contracts, for more of the same types of opportunities? Opportunities that can only come from lobbying politicians to pass laws or create policies that cause the asylum crisis to drag out further. Even if that doesn't happen, this crisis is guaranteed to keep going on in New York City. Because even though we're far from the border, the safety net here is more generous than anywhere else in the country. And as a matter of fact, families in the shelter system, specifically family shelters like this one, can stay for as long as they want. Yes, they have to reapply for shelter every 60 days, but they are not barred from reapplying like the single adults or single adult families are. But even though those things are true, there's another reason why these new border restrictions might actually exacerbate the crisis faced by sanctuary cities, and it's not what most people think. Because right now at the border, you've got thousands of people just waiting for something to happen. They thought they were going to get into the country within a certain time frame, and now that time frame might end up being extended indefinitely, which means they're going to have to find another way in as they start running out of things like food, water, and supplies, and money. And we've already got evidence that's happening.
So tomorrow marks 1 week since the president made that announcement to crack down on the border. But people that we're talking to here on the front lines, including people within Border Patrol, say not much has changed here. And the numbers that we've actually obtained from sources reflect that as well.
You know, part of the reason for this non-decrease in crossings is because there's another group besides the hotels here in New York that can make a lot of money off this crisis even before people enter the country. And that would be the cartels and smugglers charging hefty fees to get people around the border. Those groups now have way more customers now that the border is restricted in some manner. Because all of those people waiting need help getting in, they can't wait forever. And I'm sure they're willing to ask for whatever little money people have left in order to get them through on their own terms. And since the folks coming in know they did it in an unapproved way, where do you think they're going? Probably not Texas or Florida. They're gonna want to come here to New York. And what that means is you could potentially have thousands of people coming to New York City who are stranded in the sense that they can never move economically up the country's ladder. Because it may take years for many people that come into the country this way to ever start working legitimately. Which means the amount of time they're gonna need access to a safety net like the one found here in New York is gonna go up. Getting on their own feet, moving out of a shelter, that stuff's gonna take a lot longer. And although the idea of entering the country without the means to ever get started here sounds like a bad one, you've got to remember many of these folks are out in the desert right now running out of supplies, and getting into the country quickly is their only option.
And the executive order border is not acting as a deterrent whatsoever, because we are still seeing groups like in San Diego where hundreds of people are crossing. Also in the Del Rio sector, we're seeing people.
So regardless of your views on the asylum crisis, you've got to understand that these people, they're in a really tough position. They came all the way to the border. Some of them spent thousands of dollars, spent weeks coming there, and now they find out they're stuck there indefinitely. They're gonna have to come in because they've spent so much to get this far. Turning around is not really an option. That's not an endorsement of this crisis or how it's being handled. It's just the human predicament that exists. And it's worth mentioning that many of the folks coming into the country are from such war-torn parts of the globe that even being in America without the permission to work is still better than staying where they were at. Which means the incentives to come here are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than they were when this crisis first began. That's why you still have thousands of people coming to New York City by bus every single week, week after week. But there could be other explanations for the surge in traffic at the border that's just not going away, even with the new restrictions. And what could be part of this is the federal government has a designation for some people coming into the country called temporary protected status, which is different than somebody who's classified as an asylum seeker. This applies to people from Venezuela, Honduras, a couple of other countries, but it basically allows them to enter the country without fear of deportation, and they can get work permission in 30 days. Here's a list of countries that had their temporary protected status renewed at the end of last year, and it could be that as temporary protected status is extended to more and more countries, more people will try to come to the United States, especially when this is a humanitarian destination reserved for only the most war-torn, poverty-stricken parts of the globe.
We're seeing some of those exemptions play out right now because they're acknowledging that they don't have the resources or the means to deport everyone, especially people from countries in South America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. So DHS and
So it sounds like if the border is overwhelmed and the resources we have at the border are insufficient for the people that are there to do their job, the new rules can be suspended under what is considered to be an operational exemption, which critics say means that as border surges keep happening, more and more people will end up making their way to America, especially sanctuary cities where the safety net for them is still wide open for business, where people still have access to schools, to medical care, and even in the case of families, prepaid debit cards to help with nutrition, and where companies are making millions turning their bankrupt businesses like hotels into shelters that may operate in perpetuity, at least as far as the owners of those hotels have anything to say about it. What do you think about New York's asylum crisis, and how responsible for this crisis are the very same companies that are profiting from it while serving subpar food and running subpar shelters? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.